Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Red Circle. Also, the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Make sure you hit like, subscribe, and turn the notifications on. Also, check out Off the Floor. That's our new Discord server. We're up near 500 subscribers. You can communicate with all of them as well as us. Something we're going to be starting on Off the Floor. The four hosts of Five on the Floor going to be rotating days and taking Q&As. So basically, you can jump in there on the main thing chat, post your questions for Greg, Alex, myself, or Brady, and we'll come on and answer all of them. We promise that for you on Off the Floor. So check it out. The description, the link is right here in the description on YouTube, on the podcast feed, and also pinned to the top of the Five Reasons Twitter page. Also, check out the great sponsors of the Five Reasons Sports Network, Michael Robert and his team at Water Cleanup of Florida, your one-stop water and mold cleanup shop. Get the preventative maintenance. You're going to want to do that because you don't want to deal with the insurance companies after the fact. We know that you won't always get what you're supposed to get from them, even if Water Cleanup will do a great job taking care of whatever it is that happened. Prevent it before it happens. So check it out. Leak detection is the key thing. Make sure that you know what's going on in your house, your place of business, or any other place that is important to you. Check them out. Water Cleanup of Florida, based in Boca Raton. They service the entire Tri-County area. WCUFL.com. Again, that's WCUFL.com. Water Cleanup of Florida. If you've got the schmutz,
they got the guts.
And now, today's episode.
Down to Biscayne. Yikes. Five on the floor. Ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing. You can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars. Wearing bubble frogs. Just like Butler said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the floor playing. Got it all band. Y'all seen the block. Stop with one hand. And Pat we trust. It's power, have the guts. We're here to bring the heat. Y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to Five on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, and Alex Toledo, plus others from the Five Reasons Sports Network.
All right, welcome back to Five on the Floor. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me, Ethan J. Skolnick, and at Five Reasons Sports. We got Greg Sylvander. You can follow me at Greg Sylvander. Today's floor plan, Greg's going to be smiling through this episode. It's taken me 4 years. But I finally caved in. I'm going to do a full-fledged heat culture episode. Those who know me and have followed my work know that as I've made the transition from journalist to whatever the hell it is I am right now, I have fought the whole heat culture designation, just as I fought the heat lifer designation. That one was stupid, by the way, because you can't really do the heat lifer thing when Zoe and Dwyane had to come back. But anyway, it is what it is. Heat culture is something that Greg Sylvander lives by. We talk about guts and all the rest of that stuff. And for a little while, I didn't like the term because I thought that the Heat were using it to make up for the fact that they didn't have enough talent. Because the Heat culture thing kind of popped up after the Big Three era ended, after LeBron left, after Bosh's situation where he got sick. And then, after you were trying to sell Hassan Whiteside, James Johnson, and Dwyane Wade to the public. And then it's like, Heat culture. Okay, we're going to take these guys and make them into better players than they were before. And then we're going to flame out in the first round. And that's kind of what it felt like to me for a little while. But I will say that as I've gotten more into this space and had to deal with more fans from opposing teams on Twitter and all the rest of this stuff, there is something to this heat culture thing. I will acknowledge it. But what it means to me, Greg, is their stability. That's the first thing I start with, and we're going to get into our heat culture moments today. So we haven't prepped this, not together, and we're just going to go back and forth with our favorite heat culture moments. They could be anything. They could be on the floor, off the floor, in the locker room, whatever it is. But whatever it is that to us signifies what heat culture means. But to me, just on a macro level, it's stability. It's the fact that you're able to go through some valleys because you're going with it with the same people who got you out of the valleys the last time. And that is why this organization, in my view, has been more successful than 90% of other major sports franchises. And I'm including, NHL, MLB, NFL, any of them, is because it's the same people from 25, 30 years ago, or it's people who've been groomed by those same people and kept in-house. And it's why You can have someone who's a video coordinator like Eric Spoelstra, who's now the best coach in the world. Or you have somebody who was a media relations assistant of all things like Andy Ellisberg, and he's now the best cap guy in the world. And it's Pat Riley above all of it, kind of making sure that it still flows the right direction. And so even though we can be critical sometimes of things that they may do, the overall premises, messages, credos of the organization are the same. And that to me is significant. And I do think that leads to winning. Yes, winning leads to that, but I also think that leads to winning. So that's my overall theory. Before we go forward with our particular moments, Greg, how would you define it?
I think that the mantra is great, and I think stability leads it, as you mentioned. And to me, that stability, what it brings is a certain disposition, and it's a disposition that does not leave. And so you know what you're getting when people say like that's a Miami Heat player or that's Miami Heat basketball. There's no doubt what people are talking about with the hustle stuff and just kind of going all out and laying it all out there, all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to be cliche and just go through them all, but that stuff, when you see it consistently come back, and a lot of it has to do with that the same people are delivering it over and over again. I think that is a big part of it. You know what you're going to get from most Heat groups. There's occasionally a year where things get a little weird, and I do agree the timing of the Heat culture campaign was tough because like those of us that knew that Heat culture existed far before that, it was almost like, oh no, but this isn't a marketing slogan. Like this is actually some real stuff that has been building. I mean, I have examples of it pre-Riley even. Not that it necessarily really should predate anything that's, with Pat Riley, but to me, I just think that it's something that's been a common thread since Riley arrived. So you can say what, 94, 95, and it's still here today. So the fact that it lives on, even though now it's become a lot more commercialized, I don't think that those of us that have seen it develop and blossom, like it hasn't lost its sacredness. I'll say that just because people have commercialized it.
And it survived certain things. It survived 15 and 67, right? And just in the same way that I think for other organizations, it has a little bit. I like Spurs. The Spurs have a certain culture, and they haven't won in a while. But I think everybody assumes they will because there's a framework that's been put in place by Popovich and Buford, and obviously part of that framework is tanking so that you get a number one overall pick because that certainly worked for them with Tim Duncan, and it looks like it's going to work for them again with Wemby. But again, there's a certain trust level with that organization that if Wemby had gone somewhere else, I don't think would have necessarily existed. So this is kind of the we're not for everybody, I guess, culture that we're talking about here with Miami, and I think that's what you're getting into there. One of the reasons we're doing this episode, of course, is because we're waiting, and by the time this episode is released, we may know. I may have actually done another episode on this. We're waiting on suspensions related to the scuffle in New Orleans, which was certainly a Heat culture moment. And so we will get into some scuffles here because those are part of it. But I'll let you start here. Give me a Heat culture moment. Again, it doesn't have to be a scuffle. It could be just about anything else.
So we're starting with the scuffle. And first I want to reference the pre-Riley one. And that was when Keith Askins went crazy on the court in an Atlanta Hawks Miami Heat playoff series in Atlanta. There was a fight. There was Dwayne Farrell and Steve Smith and Grant Long getting into it. And then on the complete opposite side of the court, kind of similar to what happened in New Orleans, like the camera all of a sudden pans to the other side because they see something happening. It was Keith Askins throwing the types of punches that don't get thrown in today's NBA. Nobody throws hands like that. So anyway, that's where I'm starting. But the biggest Heat culture moment when I think of this, it's Tyler Hansborough, Udonis Haslem, and Dwyane Wade. That's where I'm going to start. And that has some skirmish activity to it in that he popped, Hansborough fouled Dwyane. He's bloodied. On the basically next possession or so, Udonis comes down and lays one on Hansborough where he fell hard and we all knew it was coming. And to me, that was a lot about the disposition of the culture and that you got your guys back. You don't let stuff like that go. No layup rule. It just reinforced all of that. So that's the leader in the pole position for me. Shout out to Keith Askins, though, is that Hansborough Udonis Haslem moment.
And we'll go through all of them. Maybe we'll even let people vote. The reason the Askins one resonates, even though most of these are going to be post Riley coming in, is because Pat kept Keith around for a reason, right? And Keith is still around. So if you have one of those moments, even if it predates Riley, it gets remembered. You get remembered as somebody who stays in the organization. All right, I'm going to go with a Heat culture. It's more than a moment, but it's kind of a movement. To me, the first Heat culture team in the Riley era was the Road Warriors team, because that symbolizes, again, toughness on the road. In hostile environments. We saw it play out later, and I'll get to this one later, with obviously the Big Three team and a lot of what they had to deal with. Now that those Heat teams with Timmy and Zoe and Mash, they didn't have, and PJ, they didn't have to deal with what the social media stuff and everything else. But they wanted some hostile environments a lot. If you go back to that particular team, and it is, again, it's always one of the is one of the melancholy things of Heat history that those teams never were able to cash in. But they just kept winning on the road. They won everywhere. They won in all circumstances. And to me, that those teams were the ones where, or that particular team was the one where Riley was able to put in kind of what the New York teams, his New York teams had, where there was a little bit us against the world type stuff. And it was symbolized by Zoe. And I feel like we're going to talk a lot about UD here. And I'm probably going to get into some Dwyane stuff as well, and some of the others. But a lot of this starts with Zoe. I feel like and I got a chance to talk to him at out of all things, the fashion show that they did last month, and about his role in all this. Because, and he said, look, when I met with Mickey and with Pat about what this was going to be, he said, Pat told me the truth. He said everything Pat said was going to happen happened. And they really, Pat and Zoe were so aligned on everything. I always used to say that basically Zoe was just a parrot of everything that Pat said. Adversity introduces man to himself, all the rest of that stuff. But it started with Zoe. Zoe was the original. They always had a Heat culture kind of power forward. Grant Long was kind of the first of those. That, again, was pre-Pat. They drafted Kurt Thomas. Obviously, they exchanged him for Mash. But it was PJ Brown for all those years. And then kind of UD was sort of the next in line to me of all that stuff. PJ did it differently than UD did, but so PJ had a hand in this too. But to me, Zoe, you want to say Heat culture? There's a reason they have Zoe do the narration on that hardest working, toughest, best conditioned bit that they do.
One thing on Zoe I got to add here. Probably if you had to encapsulate Heat culture in a YouTube video, it's his highlights from Game 6 at Dallas in 2006. Like that, what he did that night is Heat culture bottled up, shown in one felt swoop. So like that's where I'm going when we shout out Zoe. Obviously, he carried the culture, set the tone for so long, but that game under those circumstances in his role to do what he did, like that actually. And this is where I'm going to start to contradict myself. That has to be the highest of Heat culture elements right there. That Zoe Game 6.
Well, and the reason for that, you mentioned in his role, and that's the thing, because when we talk about Heat culture too, and I know this will get some people fired up about present day, but Zoe accepting that role, Goran Dragic accepting that role, Dwyane Wade accepting that role, that's a Heat culture element also. And we talk about the Spurs. That's something that Manu did with the Spurs. There are only certain organizations, I think, that would be able to get a star level player, particularly someone who's been a star for you, like the franchise pillar for you. And in that case, that's true for both Zoe and Dwyane, to accept a role like that. And so I do think that's a Heat culture thing. And I know that's going to set people aflame when they talk about what's going on now. But I do think it's worth mentioning. But I felt like, and I was in Dallas that night, and I was in the locker room also, and I was there for Rachel Nichols' question to Zoe that took Zoe 13 minutes to answer. And he actually, his answer to the first question of the press conference after they won the championship in 06 was longer than his stint on the court. And yet that stint on the court really changed that game. And he was the best center on the floor that night. Not Shaq. It was Zoe. And I've always felt like that little spell, that was Zoe's fury from all those years that he had to endure, right? Had to endure losing to the Knicks, then had to endure getting sick when they put an even better team around him in 2000, and had to endure leaving. We all know that that didn't go so well. He wasn't so happy at the time, and there was some friction there. You know, the Toronto thing, the New Jersey thing, and then coming back and having that was that. You're right. That's definitely one of them. I'll give you another one here. We're just going to keep bouncing these back and forth. I'll give you a heat culture moment. Team is 11-30, right? In 16-17, and even Andy Ellisberg is like, okay, Pat, it might be time to tank this thing, like, or at least have a conversation about it. And they were supposed to have that conversation. Team won 3 games on a homestand. They got to 14-30, and they never had the conversation. If you talk about a season that ended up going nowhere, but still embodies Heat culture, and it pissed some Heat fans off at the time, by the way, although it worked out because you ended up dropping far enough and took Bam out of Bayou. But not punting on 11-30 and then going 30-11 and missing the playoffs by 1 game, which they would have made the playoffs that year if Deion doesn't get hurt, doesn't sprain his ankle in the last 2 weeks of the season, because Deion was playing at a high level for them that year. That's a Heat cult. That just embodies it. As you know, couple people in the Heat organization have said to me, "We don't tank because we suck at it." They're just incapable of it. They tried it. They did it in 07-08, but they didn't plan to that year, and everybody got hurt. But they couldn't even lose games they were trying to lose. I mean, another Heat culture moment was, I remember getting a call, someone who still works for the Heat, I'm friendly with. Thanks very much for the credentialing. I got a call from the Heat about a column I wrote for the Sun Sentinel on the last week of the 2003 regular season, where I wrote how they need to lose to Toronto this week. They need to lose to Toronto because they need to get the extra ping pong balls to move as far up as they can to try to get in the mix. At the time, it was for Bosch that I thought the play for, but of course, it could have been Carmelo. It could have been who knew. Okay, so maybe just get up as high as you could. And I got a call from someone that said, "Ethan, why are you doing this?" I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "We don't do that. We don't lose on purpose. So stop it." They won the damn game in Toronto, ended up dropping to 5. Toronto took Bosch, and the Heat took Wade. Another one that ended up working out for them.
Yep.
And and they end up with Bosch in the long run. And I think that's when Spoelstra will say it's the karma of the game, so to speak. You don't cheat the game, and it doesn't cheat you. You ended up with Bam and Dwyane, and eventually Bosch, because you didn't try to lose at the end of the season. And I remember they tried to lose a game a couple years ago in Philly. Or not tried to lose. We thought they should try to lose it, and they ended up winning that game. Didn't Michael Beasley play in that game? I think.
Did.
Right. So anyway, the not tanking thing, and again, 16-17, 2002, 2003. That's Heat culture stuff. All right, hold yours. We're gonna get to some more here after the break. Before we go, again, we're waiting as we speak here on suspensions to be handed down. So I'm sure we'll get into some more fight stuff because we haven't done enough of that. Do want to mention a great sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network, our friends over at Prize Picks. Use the code 5 FIVE. Want to be clear on this because some of you may have heard this. In the state of Florida, and this is the first time I'm mentioning this, by the way, but again, we were waiting for it to become final. In the state of Florida, they have to tweak the game to stay legal down here. Again, it has nothing to do with us. This is there's some politics at play here. There's a certain vendor that may not want some of these other vendors to be in the state of Florida. You could probably figure out who it is. But we're mentioning this here because if you have money in your Prize Picks account, you will be able to withdraw it. You won't have any problem with that at any time. But if you want to play it in the state of Florida, do it this week. Do it before the 29th. And if you want to sign up and play, you still can do that this week. Use the code 5. And if you're outside of the state of Florida, or I believe in 40 other states, you still can play Prize Picks. So we know that we have a lot of fans of the Heat who are outside the state of Florida. We got them clued into Prize Picks, and you can continue to play unless something happens in your state, like the wacky politics of the state of Florida. Wacky's not really the word I want to use, but it is what it is. Use the code 5 FIVE. Get your initial deposit matched up to $100. I do want to mention Better Edge is still legal in the state of Florida. We're going to be still endorsing both. Better Edge, you use the code 5RSN and you get $20 to play. We have the contest. And the difference is that there's someone on the other side of the bet. And that's why Florida has kept some of these legal and not others. But Prize Picks is supposed to be coming back with something new here that will comply. So just keep your account. If you need to withdraw your money, you can do it from Prize Picks. Better Edge, just keep playing. Or maybe if you've been with Prize Picks, try Better Edge also. Use the code 5FIVE. They got props. I won on the Heat game the other night. We've got contests, competitions, and all that great stuff. Use the code that one 5RS, and you get $20 to play. All right, Greg, you're up.
Wow. I would have to say that the night in Denver where the entire locker room was being held back by Andy Ellisberg, and that was captured in photograph, is a huge like snapshot that screams Heat culture for me. I would also say that Jimmy Butler going absolutely bonkers in Indiana was a lot of fun and a Heat culture moment, getting up in TJ Warren's face in the comments afterwards. So that's a big one for me.
I just want to mention before you go on that one, somebody posted this on Twitter. The Heat are 4-0 in the games that somebody pisses Jimmy off. Right. So there's TJ Warren, the Grant Williams one. Right.
Oh, that's a great one.
The Grant Williams one. And I'm not thinking of the other two right off the top of my head, but anyway, he posted the videos from those. Whenever you end up with a Jimmy meme off a confrontation, assume that the Heat won that game. That's because that's basically what happens. All right, go ahead, because I got a couple related to that for a different player.
PJ Brown picking up Charlie Ward and hurling his ass into the third row or so is going to be the other one that I have to make sure makes this show. That was a huge moment. It obviously was not the most, I mean, he didn't play again that series, so it wasn't great for the Heat necessarily completely, but they did win the series, came back from a, what was it, a 3-1 deficit, right? That they came back from?
Yeah, that was the one. I always get them confused, although I was at all of them. And again, we'll never see that again. Like 4 series, primary rivals, all those storylines, and all 4 series go the distance, either 5 or 7 games, whatever the series was that year. But that year was the one where they had to stagger the suspensions. And we talked about this over the past 24 hours because we thought maybe the NBA might have to stagger the suspensions for the Heat if they get everybody who left the bench for the Heat early. Assistants need to take care of that stuff. Can't let them off the bench. They need to go through those drills. But they had to stagger them because they didn't have enough players to do it. So they ended up, and then of course the Heat, that's the one the Heat won. I will say that the PJ Brown, Charlie Ward one always sticks out to me first because they used to let us sit baseline at the Garden, which is just, I mean, these are the stuff I miss from my early days of covering the league. So I was literally right there. It was right in front of me. Like it was, and it was the most unlikely thing because PJ was my favorite, like to deal with. Like I loved dealing with PJ Brown, just a class person and always available to us, and was the last guy you would think would want any smoke. Like just like on that team, he was just like the quiet. He was the quiet one. He was the regal one. He was not, Timmy would say exactly what he was thinking. Vashon wouldn't look at you. Marley had an edge to him, always had an edge to him. And of course, Zoe, that guy, like PJ was like, PJ was the guy, you go sit and have a nice dinner with a glass of wine, bottle of wine with. And Charlie Ward was like the religious one. I mean, he was controversial in some ways, but it was like those two guys to get into it. They ended up winning that series. All right, here's to me, if you want Heat culture in a player later, the moments that I remember the most with Dwyane are when you don't make Dwyane bleed his own blood, like just. And I was at this one at the Garden too, the Gallinari thing. If you remember that one, this was early. This is how long Gallinari's been playing. This was like early in Gallinari's career with the Knicks before they traded for Melo. And if you remember, he got he.
I was in Miami, I think.
Bleed. Oh, was it in Miami? I can't remember which of the two was. There was another one. I'm sorry. The one in New York was the
game winner.
What was it? No, but he also had the Band-Aid, the Wade Aid or Band-Aid or whatever the heck the game. Yes, there was the one. Okay, that was the one in Miami. That's right, where he made him bleed his own blood. Gallinari did, and there were a bunch of these. Like whenever you would piss Dwyane off, he would go back at you harder, and that is a quality that Jimmy has. Also, Dwyane wouldn't talk as much, but he would get this look, right? Yeah, like that, and it was like, all right, you're effed right now. That's pretty much what would happen, and also for the big three, the entire 27 game winning streak. Was another heat culture moment to me. The game that jumps out in Cleveland, they fall behind by 27.
Yep, and come all the way
They
back.
could have let that shit go. Shane hits a three, LeBron hits a three, and it was an avalanche from that team. And again, that team it was just a refuse to lose 2 months. Like they were down in so many of those games, and they kept coming back, coming back, coming back, coming back. Another heat culture moment right after the 27 game winning streak. We talked about this again. I don't think you can get more heat culture than the president of the organization defending his star player and saying that an executive on another team, a rival team with whom he's had battles with in the past, should shut the fuck up and manage his own team. Very heat culture. And that happened right after the 27 game winning streak ended. And I've talked about this before. We were in New Orleans, the game right after the Chicago loss, and that happened. That happened there. So
I got one.
For the 27 game winning streak. Those are the ones that jump out to me.
Kind of as we close here and get I'm chronologically trying to do this. I think that in retrospect now, Jimmy and Spo having so are you gonna fight me moment, and then them also having that run in the playoffs as an 8 seed. That's a pretty heat culture exemplified situation as well. That at the time I thought the team was on thin ice. I heard the team was like really what's the word for it? Grumpy towards each other. Let's just say that it was an edgy group, but then all of a sudden it catapulted them into a run, right? So that was another heat culture moment that's a little bit more recent than some of the stuff we're hitting them with the 90s references.
And another macro heat culture thing, of course, is the development of the undrafted. That has become a huge part of this. When people talk about heat culture, one of the things is when fans of other teams now are like, wait, they did it again? Like, what is this black magic thing? Like, who is this? Like, there is this fear among fan bases of other teams, particularly teams like Boston, Milwaukee, New York, Philadelphia, the ones that are in the Heat space now. Whenever the Heat have a guy pop for a game, like Jamal Cain had a game in preseason, and everybody was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Wait, they found another one, and it's happened with Highsmith. It happened with Strus. It happened obviously with Duncan. It happened with Gabe. You go back. This was a little bit more predating, but Riley did find these guys before this recent era. There were the Anthony Carters of the world. It just didn't get quite the same, Ike Austin, etc. It just didn't get the same notoriety that it does now, obviously, because this has become a thing. There is an assumption pretty much that anybody who comes through the Heat pipeline now is going to have moments and probably going to be starting for you in the Eastern Conference Finals against somebody. And so another heat culture moment that I'll give you, and this is a more current one, is player that they get off a two-way because J. Cole suggests him ends up in your program as maybe potentially an 11th or 12th guy starting in the Eastern Conference Finals, averaging 20 plus, and basically putting his hand in front of his face while he makes threes from the corner in TD Garden. Caleb Martin last postseason was pretty much heat culture. Like that symbolizes it. Or the fact that Strus and Vincent were starting in the freaking finals.
Exactly.
Regardless of whether or not what we felt about the decisions that were made in them in the offseason. That is also a heat culture thing. And here, to me, the slogan that is most heat culture of all of them, it's not the best condition, most this, most that, most that. That's good. It's more organic than that. To me, the most heat culture slogan, and this is why I think we did this episode today as we're waiting for suspensions to be handed down, is 3 words. We have enough. Like that has, to me, become the heat culture slogan because it's organic from Spo, and he truly believes it. He's a psycho about this stuff. Like you cannot tell him anything about that. If you try to talk to him about players who've been out or any of this kind of stuff, he will not freaking tolerate it. It is the anti-Doc Rivers. It is the anti many of these organizations that have been in the mud for a long time. It is the we have enough. There is this feeling that, and he's not, when he talks about that, he's not just talking about the players they have on the court that night. He's talking about the organizational structure, the salary cap space, the money that they have to allocate to players, the resources for development. He's saying we're not going to complain about whatever it is. There may be things that are not perfect, not exactly what they may be somewhere else or whatever. For this moment, for this group, we have enough. And I think if you don't have that at the top of your organizational structure, and Spo is the face of the organization now. Pat still guides it. The Arisons still fund it, and etc. But Spo is the one who's facing the public and the media on a daily basis. That phrase is the heat culture phrase. That's the one. We're not for everybody. There are some other good ones, but to me, it's we have enough. Like, okay,
put it on a t-shirt.
We move forward. We have enough. Exactly. We have it on a t-shirt. All right. Thanks to Greg. Thanks everybody for listening. Again, check out Better Edge. Use the code 5RSN. Prize Picks. You got a few more days. Get those props in over the next few days. If you're in the state of Florida, if you're outside the state of Florida, you can still sign up. We'll let you know when everything is cleared on that here locally as well. And of course, Water Cleanup of Florida. I'll let you close with us again. If you've got the schmutz,
they got the guts.
Thank you for listening to the 5 on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. After all, someone needs to listen to my dad.